bottle deposit was behind the dairy. And some people used to jump over the back fence and take the same bottles back heaps of time.
Well, someone should write that down so that doesn't happen.
Well, you're giving your age away by calling it an Eskimo pie, which is culturally insensitive.
Eskimo, yes.
True.
We very, very... Do they still have Eskimo?
No.
No, they don't. All right,
No.
yes. And I can recall them. Now, another one here. Wallace, when I and my sister were 7 and 6, we walked miles pushing a pram to pick up bottles. I made pounds, had a packet of sweets each, and gave the rest of money to my hard-pressed mother. This is for Ella. Ella really wanted to do this particular story. A completely different topic. Rounding out today's show, cheese. It's delicious, yes, but it's also a vital part of a new internet meme sensation, which is parents filming themselves throwing slices of processed cheese at their babies. It's an extraordinary thing, this.
I watched the video you sent me and I literally have vomit in my mouth even saying it. If there is anybody in my social circle out there who posts an image of themselves throwing cheese at their baby, I will hunt you down and I will hurt you.
Well, I mean, I feel the same about people who post Minion memes on Facebook. So...
Well, the Australian columnist Bianca Wordley writes this practice is in fact horrifying. Parents abandoning their duty of care to their children and exploiting them solely to get a few laughs and kicks out of random people on the internet. What do you reckon about these types of memes, Dean?
Well, I think there's a danger of, getting into that sort of, the hysteria and stuff like that, like happened around Momo. So people hear this thing, they think it's terrible, but really it may be a handful of people doing it, and it's nowhere near as prevalent as I think people make it out. I saw the video in question a week or so ago on Reddit, I think, and I'm sure there's been a few people pulling it out, but I think the more exposure these silly memes get, sometimes that actually just makes people do it more. So I tend to think these silly memes and people being silly like that, I just sort of ignore it. Because I think sometimes people, it's that moral panic. That was the word I was looking for.
You're in the digital sort of space there, Dean. Are these memes? Are they ramping up? Are there more and more of them, or what do you think?
Oh, I don't think so. I think if you look at the history of moral panics, have existed as long as we've had society. It's just the medium changes. Memes are a funny way of expressing things, and I think. Right. You get people posting inappropriate memes, and I think they're largely self-policing. I think the entire, most of the, I guess, younger internet has already moved on to the next meme, and I think what will happen now is a tail end of media getting obsessed about poor babies, which is terrible. Can I just say, I don't support babies having cheese thrown at them, but I think, that ship sailed, and there's always someone doing something silly in the world.
Some of them are funny, though, aren't they, Ella? Some of them are funny.
Yes, obviously. The old ice challenge that went viral.
The ice challenge.
The ice challenge. I didn't quite succumb to it, but I was very pleased that it did raise some money for a very worthy charity. But I see no merit in posting. I mean, Jimmy Fallon did it by telling his kids that he'd eaten all of their Halloween candy, and it became a thing that people would send videos into his shows, showing they'd taken their children's candy and eaten it. I mean, it's cruel and vicious behaviour. It's outrageous.
I'm a secondary school teacher and mother of two 20-somethings. We are facing an epidemic of adolescent mental ill health, and I believe partly caused by the fact kids are too busy and no longer have time for free play. Ella, yes. Henry, Dean Hall, you have been absolutely delightful this afternoon. Thank you both for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'm back tomorrow at 3:45. See you then. Checkpoint now.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, May 3rd is D-Day for the Pike River mine re-entry. We have the Minister responsible, Andrew Little, and a reaction from the families. A complaint about political donations made by exiled National MP Jamie Lee Ross is now in the hands of the Serious Fraud Office. 25 thoroughbred horses died in last year's racing season. 7 months into this one, 8 have been killed. Is it good enough? Isaiah Papali'i's been suspended from the Warriors opening match after being done for drink driving, a month after fronting an anti-drink drive campaign. And why it's not cheap to be green. How much does it really cost to replace your wood burner?
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. A company owned by the high-profile businessman Eric Watson has avoided paying $51 million in tax. In a judgment released today, the High Court agrees with the IRD that allowing for interest on the use of the money, Cullen Group owes the department $112 million. 16 years ago, Mr Watson restructured his affairs using two Cayman Islands-based companies, which then loaned money to Cullen Group. Because the three were seemingly unrelated, Cullen Group was allowed to pay a 2% levy on interest instead of 15% withholding tax. The High Court has backed the IRD in finding that Mr Watson set things up that way to avoid paying tax. The Minister responsible for Pike River re-entry, Andrew Little, says he's highly confident the operation will get underway on May the 3rd. At Parliament this afternoon, Mr Little revealed the date when workers will break through the concrete seal 30 metres into the drift or access tunnel. He says an incredible amount of work has been done in preparation.
I've been around the hillside and climbed up virtually vertical sort of cliff faces. That's the terrain that they've had to work on. So it has taken time, it's been done well, it's been done properly, it's been done safely. So I'm confident that we'll meet that 3rd of May target date.
Andrew Little says the team will only go as far as the rock fall at the end of the drift, and it's too early to say how long that will take. The former National MP, Jamie Lee Ross, says he's pleased the police have referred his complaint to the Serious Fraud Office, as things don't get referred to the office without good reason. Mr Ross has accused Nationals leader Simon Bridges of asking him to split up a large donation into amounts so small they would not have to be declared under the Electoral Act. He says he has spoken with the police on several occasions in relation to their investigation, but is not concerned that he himself may be liable for prosecution. The police say the case has been referred to the SFO so it can look further into matters uncovered in the investigation so far. An Auckland Welfare Trust says dental care is so expensive, some people are pulling their own teeth to stop the pain. The Dental Association says the high cost of private dental care is turning adults away from regular checkups and putting more pressure on emergency clinics at hospitals. But the Huakina Development Trust in South Auckland says even that is not an option for low-income families. Its Tumuaki, Maria Clark, says desperate people are taking matters into their own hands.
People are pulling their own teeth out, and then we've had a few problems where people have had to come in and see the doctors to get them stitched because they've just ripped the teeth out more or less because it's got so loose or it's so rotten that it's best, that's the only way they can do it.
Maria Clark of the Huakina Development Trust. As more cases of measles are confirmed at a Canterbury primary school and district court, Pharmac says extra supplies of the MMR vaccine will reach the region about midday tomorrow. GPs are largely out of stock and awaiting delivery of a further 18,000 doses. Pharmac's Director of Operations, Lisa Williams, says there's enough to meet Canterbury's needs.
We're just working with Canterbury DHB and the primary care practices to understand what volumes they need over the next few weeks, and there's stock in the country to enable us to fill those orders, and we're talking with suppliers as well to see if we can secure more stock for New Zealand if that's needed.
Lisa Williams of Pharmac. A man who hundreds of thousands of people have seen in a viral video verbally attacking a Māori woman is painting himself as the victim. Erina Wehi accuses the Pākehā man of being racist towards her, but he says it was the other way round. Lee Marama McLaughlin reports.
The video shows Ms Wehi confronting the man on a road south of Auckland. He repeatedly swears at her, calling her low-life scum and telling her to get a job. She says the video shows how racism is alive. But the man who works at Alarm Services says it was Ms Wehi's driving that caused the issue, and she was racist towards him at first. He says he's filed a complaint to the police over her driving, her defamation of him, and the fact that people are harassing him about the video. Kuli Marama McLaughlin, tēnei.
The blogger Cameron Slater has been ordered to pay an Auckland businessman $70,000 for severe humiliation, loss of dignity and injury to feelings. The Human Rights Review Tribunal has found that in a series of whale oil blog posts in 2012, Slater held Matt Blomfield up as a figure of contempt and and ridicule. He had claimed that as a journalist he was exempt from the Privacy Act, but the tribunal says it does not accept that the blog posts complained about comprised news activity as defined in the Act. It says they were part of a calculated attack on the businessman and an extended assassination of his character. Slater, who suffered 2 strokes in October, declared himself bankrupt last month. It's 5:05. The New Zealand captain Kane Williamson is in doubt for the third and final cricket test against Bangladesh after suffering a chest injury while fielding in the innings and 12-run second test win in Wellington. New Zealand wrapped up victory in the rain-affected match shortly before lunch today. Needing 221 to make New Zealand bat again, Bangladesh were dismissed for 209, with pace bowler Neil Wagner taking 5 for 45. The final test starts in Christchurch on Saturday, and Black Caps coach Gary Stead says they'll be cautious with Williamson, who's likely to be replaced by the uncapped Will Young. Williamson concedes he didn't think today's win would come as easily as it did.
If we're honest, we didn't see it unfolding quite as it did. The Bangladesh side bowled really well with the new ball in the first innings and perhaps without a bit of luck, and we were able to capitalise on that and get a good sort of first innings total on the board, and when we were able to do that and come back today and late last night and bowl for a test victory was pretty exciting.
Kane Williamson. The Warriors are standing down forward Isaiah Papali'i from their National Rugby League season opener against Canterbury because of a drink driving offence. Chief Executive Cameron George has confirmed the 20-year-old second rower will miss Saturday's game in Auckland as punishment for what he says is a low-range offence. Coach Stephen Kearney says Papali'i will be available for their round 2 match against West Tigers in Sydney. That's the news.
Advising caution.
When asked about that yesterday, said that the use of parliamentary privilege in that way I considered to be ill-advised, and I would not recommend that.
Getting prepared.
We need to make sure consumers can still get that protection, and we need to start looking at that now.
And taking action.
But it's a bit disconcerting when you're working away there and there's about 50 wasps crawling across the visor of your protection suit.
Always a buzz with the latest. Morning Report with Guy Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, with the spectre of a gondola on Franz Josef, the tension between tourism and recreation in our national parks. And after 10, Mexican investigative journalist Annabel Hernandez on her remarkable account of the disappearance and deaths of 43 students and the government cover-up. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mainly fine weather. Waitomo, Taumaranui, Taupo, Taranaki, Whanganui and Taihape. Rain developing in Taranaki this evening with a few heavy falls and spreading elsewhere at times tomorrow. For Manawatu to Wellington, also Wairarapa, a few evening showers today and rain for a time tomorrow morning. For Marlborough, scattered rain today and tomorrow morning, then clearing. Nelson and Buller, periods of rain, some heavy falls and possible thunderstorms in the west. Westland and Fiordland, cloud increasing today, rain tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, then clearing from the south later in the day. For Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mainly fine today but isolated showers south of Timaru, some possibly heavy. Tomorrow afternoon and evening, a squally southerly change spreads north with a period of rain and possible thunderstorms in Otago. Chatham Islands, occasional rain or showers. It's 5:08. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. And this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. May the 3rd is D-Day for re-entry into the Pike River mine. The minister responsible for the re-entry, Andrew Little, announced the date today and says an incredible amount of preparation has gone into getting the mine ready. The West Coast mine exploded in 2010, killing 29 men. Mr. Little says a skilled team will be going in and police are working with them to identify any material which may be relevant, including for victim identification. The police will not re-enter the mine themselves. I spoke to the minister a short time ago and asked what realistically the team expects to find.
There's a lot of the drift to recover, so over 2 kilometres. There's a network of tunnels right at the far end before the major rockfall that prevents us going any further, called the pit bottom and stone. There's a lot of equipment that is there. On the way, of course, there's recovering Russell Smith's loader and other equipment that's been sent in remote to try and see what's there. All that has to be pulled out. There is a chance, and it is only a chance, and the way that Russell Smith and Daniel Rockhouse did, getting far enough up the drift to escape, that others may have got up the drift even if they didn't make it. And as I say, there was a chance that there may be some recovery of remains, but that is all we can say at this point. But there is still value in getting into that pit bottom and stone and checking equipment and better ascertaining what is more likely to have happened than not.
Minister, I'm sure you've had all sorts of advice. So when you say a chance, do you mean a very slim chance, almost negligible, or what have you been told about that?
More than negligible, but certainly not a high probability. And that's just ascertaining what is more likely than not to have happened on the day. I know the Royal Commission made their findings about where they thought people were, but they did that on the basis of what various managers of the company said their people were expected to be. The reality is this was shortly after a change of shift. It was a Friday afternoon. Can't guarantee that people were going to be where they were precisely expected to be. People are moving around. We also know that Daniel Rockhouse managed to get up. He didn't succumb to that first explosion. Russell Smith, who was blown off his vehicle, managed to recover enough, and they both got out. It is possible that others got far enough up the drift beyond the rockfall at the moment, and there may be some remains to recover. I don't want to overstate that, but that remains a possibility that's well worth testing by continuing with this project.
All along you have said that safety is a priority, and some of the people working on this project are pretty close to the family members. They really want this to happen. So who's going to be the independent safety monitor who makes the call to pull the pin or back it up when things are not right?
Well, we've had a number of ways of doing that, and not the least of which is WorkSafe checking every step of the way, and including looking at the ventilation plan. There's still a few things they need to tick off. We've also got my independent advisor, Rob Fife, who's been overseeing the planning and the preparation, and the overriding instruction is to the crew who will be underground, if it feels unsafe, then stop what you're doing and you get out. We have to operate on that basis because we cannot have anybody.
So you're trusting they'll tell you? You're trusting they'll be upfront about that?
Yeah, because they know, because the culture is very strong. The reason it's taken longer than expected, and for good reason, to get even to this point and to get to the point of the 3rd of May, is because everything has been done with safety as the number one overriding criterion about how we operate. And that's why, making sure that the ventilation of the drift is actually working, gets to the right atmospheric conditions that allows those guys to go in a respirable atmosphere so they can do their job. Everything has been tested, checked, rechecked all along the way. The engineering has been absolutely precise and accurate, and that's the way we will continue to do it. They know that if it feels unsafe and they consider it to be unsafe, then they have standing permission to stop and retreat, and we'll consider it from there.
So the police are not going into the drift at this stage. I mean, how confident are you that important evidence is going to be sufficiently preserved without them?
Well, the crew who will be underground have all had training, extensive training with the police on being forensically aware. If they come across anything that is significant, then they will stop. The police will make a decision about whether they want to enter the drift and have a look for themselves. The police's position is that they want to be sure that the entire drift is safe for re-entry, so that once we get down to the pit bottom and stone, they've said they'll then look at their decision to go in, but equally they've said they're on standby to make a decision if there is relevant material recovered well before then.
Minister, have you seen the advice that was given to the police, the advice that they based this decision not to enter the drift on? Have you seen that advice?
I haven't seen written advice. I've seen the reports I've had from the agency themselves about the basis on which the police are making their decision.
Have you seen the report that the police commissioned and their expert advice that informed their decision not to enter the drift?
I haven't seen that report specifically, no.
Okay, so is there any prospect that you will go beyond the drift? Because some of the families are already thinking about this. The what next?
The only commitment that we've made, that I've made and the government has made, is to do our best to recover the drift that goes down to the rockfall and includes the pit bottom and stone. We simply are not in a position to make any commitment to go beyond that.
But you're not closing it off? You're just not committing right now?
Well, as I've said to the families, you never say never, but I don't underestimate, even from what we know at the moment, the incredibly technically challenging exercise it would be to go beyond the drift, to break through the rockfall, to control the atmosphere and the mine workings, and to re-enter there. That is just a challenge of a magnitude greater than anybody could contemplate. Added to that is there'd be significant extra cost, and so we're simply not contemplating that at this point.
Just quickly, will you be there on May 3rd? Will Winston Peters be there?
Yes, it's expected that the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, myself, the Minister of Conservation, the local MP, Damien O'Connor, will all be present as that milestone event takes place.
But no suggestion any of that group that you've just listed will be entering the mine?
No, there's no intentional plan at all. This is skilled work, and they'll be properly equipped, trained, skilled people who will be making that first step to re-enter the drift.
And that is the Minister responsible for the Pike River re-entry, Andrew Little. And after 6, our South Island reporter Logan Church has been talking to the families of some of the Pike River victims about their hopes for the re-entry and what they'd like to see happen after work in the drift is complete. A police complaint made by the MP Jamie-Lee Ross about the alleged inappropriate handling of a $100,000 donation to the National Party has been referred to the Serious Fraud Office. Mr Ross popped down to police headquarters in October to deliver a recording and other evidence that he claimed revealed what National Party leader Simon Bridges knew about the donation. The now independent MP told police and media that the donation was split up into amounts smaller than $15,000, so it didn't have to be declared, but denies doing that himself. Mr Bridges maintains he has done nothing wrong. Political reporter Gia Garrick reports.
Simon Bridges has washed his hands of anything to do with the complaint, saying it's a matter for the National Party.
Have you had any contact from the SFO or any authorities? So why do you think it's not related to you?
Well, on the face of it, that's what they're saying in the statement.
So you're taking it from the statement other than any...
Well, that's all.
Because the complaint was laid about you and the party.
Well, that's all we've seen. We've seen a statement from the police. That makes clear, it seems to me, it's about the National Party. There's questions for the National Party. And I say you should direct them to them and also to the SFO.
Mr Bridges is certain all of his MPs are clean too.
I don't think national MPs have anything to worry about here. There's simply nothing to hide. I think now we're in a situation for the National Party to deal with the SFO and the SFO to undertake their investigation. I repeat though what I've said, that we do want to see swift justice here. They shouldn't muck around. They should get on with this so that we can all be quite clear.
Senior National MPs were on the same page as their leader.
It's a matter for the party, and I don't have any special information and don't want to make any comment. Thank you.
I've just only found out about it, but it's a matter for the party.
The party's the one that takes those donations and does it, I believe so. I believe we've got pretty strict rules and everything that goes around it. So, but look, it needs to play itself out.
It's a matter for the party, and we'll leave it for them to comment. It's a matter for the party. I think Simon and others have commented on it. It's a fundamental issue for the party.
Well, I've just heard of that. You've just told me, so I don't have a view at the moment. Thank you.
But the National Party's General Secretary, Greg Hamilton, wasn't keen to say much more as he ran the media gauntlet to the National Party's regular Tuesday caucus meeting.
Have you given a statement to the police or the SFO about it?
Police, yes.
The police?
Yep.
So they've been in contact with you? Is it relating specifically to the National Party or to any specific MPs?
Are you satisfied that the National's done nothing wrong?
Mr Hamilton spoke with Jamie-Lee Ross about the donation over text message last year, asking whether due process had been followed. He queried why multiple donations did not have names and addresses attached and asked they be tracked down. Mr Ross today maintained that he had nothing to do with splitting up that donation. He said that happened between the donation being offered to Mr Bridges on the 21st of May and when he saw the money arrive in the Botany Bank account.
The Serious Fraud Office is the right organisation to be looking at this, and I'm happy to cooperate with the Serious Fraud Office just as I was happy to cooperate with New Zealand Police. I went into that New Zealand Police station on my own initiative to take a complaint. I did so without having a legal counsel with me because I was confident that the information I was providing police was sufficient for them to undertake their investigations.
Mr Ross understands the police have been working to track the money backwards through multiple bank accounts. The New Zealand First leader, Winston Peters, has rounded out the day, saying Simon Bridges needs to stop ducking his responsibilities as leader.
Well, he has to, because this happened not down at Peppertea Street at the National Party headquarters. It happened right in these precincts. That's what all the evidence suggests. The person gave the money. It was divided up at the behest of who? Well, Mr. Bridges should know that. And so that's where the allegations will end up.
Mr. Peters says he's not surprised the Serious Fraud Office is investigating National, claiming they've been doing this sort of thing for years. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Gia Garrick.
It's 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We'd love to hear from you, so send us in some feedback. You can text on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Parents of children who haven't been vaccinated for measles in Canterbury are being advised to keep them at home. It comes as the region grapples with an outbreak of the contagious virus, which has so far infected 25 people, and there are warnings that that number will grow. Katie Todd reports.
Rangiora Borough School Principal Alan Sutton had the difficult task of telling parents yesterday that their children may have been exposed to measles. A student was diagnosed with the highly contagious disease, and he says at least 28 others are unimmunised. Mr. Sutton contacted their families, suggesting they get the 2 recommended MMR vaccines or stay home, which about half have done.
Some this week have actually come in and said they are now going to immunise them, but what they've actually found out is that it's not that easy. Number one, the supply, and number two, even if they do get vaccinated, it takes 14 days to kick in anyway. Probably of that 28, we've probably got 50%. Probably 14 of those at the moment for this week have chosen to stay at home.
It's not just schools where there's been a diagnosis where parents are keeping children in voluntary isolation. At nearby Fernside Preschool, owner Nicola Bain says fewer children are attending sessions, despite no known measles cases.
We've definitely seen a lot of children who are not here because their parents are choosing to keep them at home until either they can get that vaccination or, the outbreak sort of peters out. Probably between 5 and 10 children are voluntarily not coming.
Some of those staying home are on wait lists for measles vaccines. There's an extra 18,000 arriving in the region tomorrow after supplies ran low last week. Preschools aren't allowed to exclude unimmunised children, but some are asking parents for their children's vaccination status. Owner of Poppy's Preschool in Christchurch and Pepper Tree Preschool in Rangiora, Jeanette Allison, says it helps to know who is protected.
So we're just letting them know that if a child attends with measles, then they will have to stay away, but at this stage we can't exclude them.
Education Minister Chris Hipkins says he has no plans to make vaccinations compulsory for children.
Personally, I think kids should be vaccinated, but I'm not going to make it compulsory. I'm not going to say that kids should lose their right to an education because their parents don't choose to vaccinate.
The Christchurch court system has also been exposed to the disease. After a Christchurch police prosecutor contracted measles, the Law Society says notice has been provided to the Judiciary, Ministry of Justice staff, police staff and others in the legal profession. There's been no measles cases at the University of Canterbury or Ara Institute of Canterbury, but their health centres are seeing an influx of students seeking vaccinations and putting plans in place to deal with any diagnosis. And the Health Board is trying to get the message out to anyone aged 29 to 50 that they likely only had 1 dose of the measles vaccine, now known not to provide full protection. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is echoing the Health Board's pleas.
People cannot rely on others being immunised to protect them. We need to keep encouraging people to take up immunisation.
The Canterbury Primary Response Group says up to 100,000 Cantabrians could need vaccinations in coming weeks. They're warning it will be a long process and urging people for patience. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, call Katie Todd 10A.
America's Federal Aviation Authority says Boeing 737 MAX planes are still airworthy, and that's the advice it will be offering international airlines that have grounded the aircraft. An Ethiopian Airlines passenger jet bound for Nairobi crashed minutes after takeoff yesterday, killing all 157 people on board and raising questions about the safety of the Boeing 737 MAX, a new model that also crashed and killed 189 people in Indonesia in October. China has has ordered its airlines to ground the jet, a move followed by Indonesia and Ethiopia. Other airlines from North America till the Middle East kept flying the 737 MAX 8 today after Boeing said it was safe. Here's the BBC's Tom Burridge.
Welcome to the first flight of the Boeing 737 MAX 8, the first new airplane of Boeing's second century.
Since it was launched in Seattle, sales of the Boeing 737 MAX have taken off. In just 3 years, airlines have ordered around 5,000 of them. But now Boeing's latest short-haul model, the MAX 8, has an alarming safety record. The company's share price fell sharply this afternoon when trading opened in New York. Earlier, Indonesia followed China's move and also suspended all flights on a 737 MAX 8. The South African airliner Comair has also grounded one of its aircraft. This is the second time that this type of plane has crashed in just 5 months. In October, a Lion Air flight went down in the sea off Indonesia shortly after takeoff. Airlines such as Norwegian and TUI said their planes were operating as normal. Norwegian was running 3 flights in and out of Britain on the 737 MAX 8 today. But serving pilots have told me they are concerned. David Gleave specialises in aviation safety at Loughborough University.
This investigation is very important for Boeing. They have many hundreds of orders outstanding and hundreds of aircraft waiting to fly daily, some of which have been grounded. There would be particular pressure on this investigation, given that it's the second loss of this type of aircraft in a short period of time.
In the case of the crash off Indonesia, an automatic computer system on the plane, designed to prevent it from stalling, received incorrect data from a sensor and put the plane into a nosedive. Weeks later, Boeing issued a bulletin to ensure that airlines and their pilots knew how to deactivate the aircraft's anti-stall system if it erroneously kicked in. So far, there is no concrete evidence linking the two crashes. The flight data recorders from the Ethiopian Airlines flights will now be analysed, and communications between the airport's control tower and the crew will be crucial too. If any action were to be taken, European safety regulators, including the UK Civil Aviation Authority, would follow their counterparts in the United States, who are involved in the investigation.
Tom Burridge reporting. Warriors second rower Isaiah Papali'i has been suspended from this weekend's season opening match following a drink driving offence, just a month after fronting a drink drive campaign with Auckland Police. The 20-year-old, who was still allowed to train today, failed a police breath test while leaving the Rhythm and Vines concert in Gisborne on New Year's Day. He's been suspended for a week. Sports reporter Ravinda Hunia began asking questions about the incident yesterday, but when interview requests continued to be declined, she went to today's training session to front Warriors coach Stephen Kearney.
Is Isaiah Papali'i up for selections this Saturday?
He's not, no.
Are you able to delve into why he's not available?
No, I'm not. No, again, it's a club issue, so but he'll be available next week.
The club issue was met with confusion as the 20-year-old second rower trained with the rest of the side today, showing injury was perhaps off the table, not to mention Kearney's efforts to keep it under wraps.
There has been talk that he's been suspended from the round. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, I couldn't answer that question for you, but he's not available selection through from a club point of view, and but he'll be ready for round 2.
And when will we be able to know what the issue is around us not being available?
I just told you it's a club issue. That's the issue. So that's all we'll say on it.
Warriors CEO Cameron George refused to be interviewed, but shortly after the press conference released a statement confirming Papali'i had failed a police breath test while leaving a concert in Gisborne on January 1st. He faces a 1-game suspension, and George said Papali'i has expressed extreme remorse and feels like he's let his teammates, club, fans and family down. While Kearney refused to disclose any details, he made his expectations of off-field behaviour clear.
I've got a pretty good idea, I think, what works at a footy club, and if you're carrying on like an idiot, it doesn't work. So that's probably my biggest teaching or lesson to the lad away from the footy field is about being sensible and certain responsibility in the community, making sure that we do the right thing. It's not that hard.
Papali'i was a rising star in 2018. In August last year, he and his mother Lorena made history as the first mother and son to represent the same NRL club simultaneously. Papali'i also featured in the Warriors' Drink Driving Free campaign last December, where he worked with Auckland Transport and the New Zealand Police at checkpoints across the city, rewarding sober drivers with free tickets to matches. His own drink driving incident happened just a month later, and while it was during the off-season, Coach Kearney says the behaviour is unacceptable. He says his priority is clearly on round one of the NRL competition, despite the loss of a key player.
Like everyone, we just want to get on with playing. Some people just got an opinion to voice, but no, it's of no issue to us. We focus on day to day what we've got to do to perform in the weekend.
The Warriors will face the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs at home at Mount Smart Stadium on Saturday afternoon. RNZ could not reach Papali'i for comment. Mo te hōtaka o te pō nei, ko Ravinda Hunia aho.
On Checkpoint on RNZ National, the fight for compensation for East Coast locals affected by a tidal wave of forestry debris is set to ramp up. Deaths in the thoroughbred racing industry and the crime-busting software developers who've taken out the country's top science prize. As always, we'd love to hear from you, so do text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. First, here's the headlines with Susanna.
A company owned by expat businessman Eric Watson has been confirmed by the High Court as having avoided paying $51 million in tax. Today's court judgment agrees with the IRD that Cullen Group owes it $112 million, including interest. Mr Watson used Cayman Islands companies to restructure his affairs, and they loaned money to Cullen Group. Cullen Group was allowed to pay a 2% levy on interest instead of 15% withholding tax. The High Court has backed the IRD in finding that Mr Watson set things up that way to avoid paying tax. The former National MP Jamie Lee Ross says complaints don't get referred to the Serious Fraud Office without good reason. Mr Ross has accused Nationals leader Simon Bridges of asking him to split up a donation into amounts that would not have to be declared under the Electoral Act. The police say the SFO can look further into matters uncovered in the investigation so far. The minister responsible for Pike River mine re-entry has announced May the 3rd as the date workers will go into the drift. Andrew Little says a huge amount of work has already been done, but more is needed before attempting re-entry, including breaking the concrete seal 30 metres into the tunnel. It's hoped going into the mine will shed light on what caused the explosions that killed 29 men in 2010. Whale oil blogger Cameron Slater has been ordered to pay $70,000 to an Auckland businessman about whom he published personal information in 2012. The Human Rights Review Tribunal has found Slater held Matt Blomfield up as a figure of contempt and ridicule. Slater claimed as a journalist he was exempt from the Privacy Act, but the tribunal does not accept that the blog posts comprised news activity. It says they were part of a calculated attack and an extended assassination of Mr Blomfield's character. A panel of glass at the Auckland Sky Tower observation deck has fractured. A Sky City spokesperson says there are 3 layers of glass on the deck which people can walk over, and the cracked one is on the top. He says the main layer at the bottom is still protected, but the area will be cordoned off until it can be replaced. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Not sure I care how many layers of glass there are. I'd be a little bit nervous about that. And in further business news, as Susanna was saying, High Court has confirmed that high-profile businessman Eric Watson's company Cullen Group must pay its $112 million bill to IRD after it set up an elaborate structure to avoid paying tax. In 2002, Mr Watson moved to the UK. He repackaged his business affairs into 2 Cayman Islands-based companies, which then loaned money to the New Zealand-based Cullen Group. Now, in a judgment that was released today, Justice Palmer said the arrangement was set up so that the company could pay a 2% levy on interest instead of 15% withholding tax. Tax consultant Terry Boucher told business reporter Kim Savage the case will have repercussions.
This is fairly significant. It is a big case. I mean, there's 2 parts to it. There's $51 million of tax. That is the difference between the withholding tax, the approved issuer levy that Cullen Group paid, Cullen Investments paid, and what Inland Revenue said it should have paid, non-resident withholding tax. And then there's another, on top of that, there's over $60 million of use of money interest, which runs when tax has been paid late. And then separately, there's even potential for the Inland Revenue to apply penalties.
Does this then serve as a bit of a warning or a lesson to companies who might be perhaps pushing the boundaries as far as some of their structures go, do you think?
Any case like this always does. The interesting part behind this is to know whether this is just an isolated example or Inland Revenue has taken this as a test case and will now go back to a number of companies it's had its eye on and say, we've just won this, so pay up. That often happens.
Certainly it does provide a bit of clarity around that approved issuer levy, doesn't it, in terms of what that means and where it does and doesn't apply?
It does and it doesn't, because one of the things the Inland Revenue did here was say, actually, you paid the tax using the approved issuer levy, but you should have paid non-resident withholding tax. And because you didn't, we can actually go back. Because this case has been going on for quite some time. It's talking about payments, a structure that was set up in 2002. And Inland Revenue appear to have said, no, we're not comfortable with this in 2010. And yet it's so more than 8 years later that we get to the courts. There was a long period of time involved in this. So Inland Revenue working around time bar issues is something I think could be a matter for appeal by Cullen Group.
And that was tax consultant Terry Boucher talking to business reporter Kim Savage there. And in a double dose of business, we've got Nona Peltier in the studio. So Nona, Briscoes Group, right? Homewares, sporting retail, all the rest of it. It is notched up another record annual result.
Yeah, they keep doing very well despite some serious financial pressures out there. So we've talked a lot about consumer sentiment and people not wanting to open up their wallet and spend. Never mind though, Briscoe still managed to make a record profit, up 3% on last year to $63.4 million, and that is what they were expecting to make. So good on them. I spoke with Rod Duke, who's the managing director of the group, and he's a pretty clever retailer. He's saying it's tough out there. The fluctuations in fuel prices has hit the cost of course, transport. But in addition to that, he said there's a lot of uncertainty that's making consumers wary. And so he's expecting a tough year ahead. And he said actually labor costs too will be a bit of a burden. Minimum wage, for example, is going to go up, over 20% over the next 2 years. All of these costs are adding to the cost of doing business for retailers.
Did he say why he thinks he's still going great guns in that environment?
You know what he does? He goes and he's a very clever fella. He goes out to talk to his suppliers, and because he's big, he manages to squeeze them on that end, so he doesn't have to pass it on to consumers. So he's clever at that. But I guess at some point everything has to give. Anyway, look, the share price was up 1 cent to $3.39 on that result, which was what the market was expecting. Overall, our top 50 index, ended up 6 points to 9,397, and that dollar that Rod Duke was talking about is really, 68.4 US cents. That's pretty high. 96.7 Australian. And that's just, we're building on that one. But interestingly, the pence has fallen 51.8, and that's because no one's exactly which way the Brexit's going to go. We're going to have a vote tomorrow, and then, depending on how that goes, we might have to have another one and then another one this week.
You'll tell us exactly what it means for the dollar tomorrow, Nona.
Well, it will be me or someone else, perhaps.
Brilliant. Thanks for joining us. That's Nona Peltier with our business news. Let's go to the East Coast now, where the fight for compensation for locals affected by a tidal wave of forestry debris is set to ramp up as all the companies charged by the Gisborne District Council say they're not guilty. 1 million tonnes of loose logs wrecked homes and was left strewn on roads, properties and beaches after 2 bouts of heavy rain last June. Tolaga Bay was the worst hit, and locals who are still cleaning up the mess 8 months later fear it will keep happening unless drastic changes are made to the industry. Anusha Bradley reports.
In June last year, unprecedented heavy rain in the Tolaga catchment washed tons of forestry debris from the hills onto the flats. The slash, as it's called, created dams, exacerbating the flooding that followed. On Mike Parker's Tolaga Bay farm, they're still cleaning up the damage.
The speed of the water has pushed fences over and gates don't swing properly, and And you have sort of culverts blowing out and silt and drains. We've had to clean out tile drains, get a machine in to do that. So it's been pretty lengthy and an expensive process.
Tolaga Bay Beach was supposed to have been cleared by 3 companies operating in the area by Christmas, but it's still littered with logs.
We're very unhappy actually, and I think all the locals are too. I've talked to quite a few and they're pretty upset. They left a big pile in the middle of the beach that's been half burnt, and people have said that they should have taken the logs away and dumped them back in their own land and cleaned the beach up. And we hear that the visitor numbers have been right down, so it's impacting on the community, the shops and people that get summertime jobs.
Every time it rains, more slash is brought downstream, and locals fear what might happen in another big storm event. Alison Waru from the local iwi is coordinating the beach clean-up. She says a fire ban means the remaining logs won't be burnt until August, and that's if no more wash up. She says forestry employs a lot of locals, and the iwi want to educate workers and companies, as well as the council, on ways to prevent such damage happening again.
I don't want to leave this mess for my mokopuna, so we have to put steps in place now so that 10 years, 15 years down the future, they're not dealing with this thing again. So it's a real long view, and that's what Uawanui is about, is that 100-year look at things, not just from June to here.
Sean Mitchell, who lost everything, including his home in the June flood, has worked in forestry for 25 years. He says installing more slash traps in plantations and in rivers upstream could be easily done now to reduce the risk.
Definitely ain't going to stop the slash from coming off the hills, but try and retain it within their estate. If it means, so there might have to be some variations for consents to be able to service the waterways, tracking along them so that you can have slash catches that are to try and catch them in smaller quantities. That's my opinion, than just using a council bridge to catch it all, because that's pretty much what the bridge has become. It's just become a giant slash catcher.
None of the forestry companies would talk to RNZ about what measures they're taking to prevent more slash damage, and the Eastland Wood Council, who represents them, also refused to talk unless a positive story was told about the industry. All 10 companies will reappear in Gisborne District Court in August. Tolaga farmer Mike Parker says he's waiting to see what happens with this case before he and other affected farmers consider launching their own legal action against the forestry companies. In Gisborne for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
8 thoroughbred racing horses have died 7 months into this racing season. That's on top of the 25 horses that were killed or had to be euthanized during the last full thoroughbred racing year, and the trend's not getting any better. Most of the horses suffered fractures or had cardiac incidents during races. The latest figures were released to Checkpoint following an interview we did last night with the Rodeo Cowboys Association about the death of a horse during a weekend event. Earlier I spoke to Martin Burns from New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing and asked what he thought of the number of horses killed in his industry last season.
Well, in terms of our total number of starters, so in horse races last season, we had 26,666 horses starts in horse races. So if you put the proportion, I suppose, against the number of starters, it's quite a low number. So, but the incidence is, I guess it's an active sport. They're unpredictable, but to an extent, as I say, unpredictable in the event of it happening. But in terms of normality over a number of years, there's a certain percentage, a small proportion that tend to occur. So,
sorry, yeah. I'm not clear what you think of that number. Whether you think it's high, whether you think it's acceptable.
It's in proportion to, say, other countries, it's a very low number. We're at the bottom end of the range in terms of comparisons with other thoroughbred racing jurisdictions, and that's probably a consequence of our race surfaces and our breeding of horses and how we, how they're trained and conditioned. So in that context, the number is favourable, but to the extent that any horse breaks down, that's obviously a concern, both in terms of that individual horse, but for the people that are, connected to it.
Okay, so you presented some statistics there to us in terms of the number of starts versus the number of deaths. So you're a billion dollar a year industry, roundabout, racing. So
Sure.
How many can you afford to lose?
Well, we wouldn't want to see any. Any time it happens, as I say, it's a concern not just for the industry, but for the people that have lost their animal that they've been caring for. So I just can't say that there's a good number for the number of fatalities that there would be.
So there is no acceptable death rate of horses in this sport, in your view?
Well, I suppose in my view, the optimum level would be none. But, as I said before, racing is, it's unpredictable to the extent that, there's so many horses participate every year. And, as in any sport, people in sport get injured, animals in sport get injured. So, and sometimes the extent of the injuries means that, a euthanasia for the horse is the most humane the most humane consequence.
Okay,
for that animal.
So a couple of things there. Euthanasia is a humane act. How do you euthanize these horses? Are you shooting them, or how exactly?
No, they're given a massive dose of barbiturate, so it's a painkiller. So the vet administers that to the horse, as soon as he's able or she's able, and then the horse basically is put to sleep.
So if you're saying that the loss of any animal is, well, not acceptable, how do you reconcile that with the fact that you've got 25 deaths of horses in one racing season?
It's, as I said before, I don't have an acceptable level.
You also raised the issue of people being injured in sport, but I suppose critics would say that people choose to participate in sport, horses don't choose to participate in this sport. What do you think of that?
Well, I think I understand where the argument comes from.
Yeah.
But I suppose the point of view is that the horses are bred, and they have been bred for, centuries, to be fit and strong and conditioned, and they are conditioned and trained for racing. They also have a mind and a personality of their own, and some horses actually are unwilling to race, and when that's the case, they don't really have a career in racing, and they find a career elsewhere, and, as a ridden horse or, a hack. So those, I think that sort of premise has to be sort of moderated by those points.
Why have you got these death rates? So last year 25, right? This year so far you say 8. What is the cause? I know you're talking about fractures, but what is leading to fractures? What is leading to the horses collapsing or dying of heart conditions? The fractures in particular, what is causing them?
Often it's incidences in the running, so horses can, one horse can collide with another and then there's a trip. So that comes down into obviously the skill and conduct of the races, which are, well controlled by our stewards, and the jockeys are, well trained as well, and obviously have a mind for their own welfare. So those rare instances where horses will collide and then may end up with those injuries is one of the causes. And otherwise, causes are, potentially related to, I guess, undiagnosed fractures potentially, and that's an area of research that's been looked into by Massey University. So that we partner with Massey University in a lot of areas, and one of them is in the research into causes of incidences like this.
So just explain to me where you think the line in the sand is, this is for entertainment purposes, the racing of these animals. So in terms of entertainment purposes, why should the industry be allowed to continue if horses are being killed in the course of this entertainment?
Well, I think, we've got to, I suppose, balance all the arguments as well. There's you say a form of entertainment. It's a form of enjoyment and pastime for large numbers of people who, whether they're involved in breeding or training the horses, whether they're employed by stables, whether they attend the race meetings as a form of fellowship and companionship. And, there's fewer and fewer forms of assembly, I suppose, in our community nowadays where people all come together from, various places. And, so it's a fellowship thing as well. So it's not just a sport for entertainment. I think it's a lifestyle, it's an economy, it's and a way of life for so many people and part of our culture.
So the lifestyle, economy and way of life, that outweighs the death of the animals?
I think we just need to balance it against those factors.
So where is the balance? Because that brings us back around a full circle, doesn't it? How many horses is an acceptable level to die during a year to make the balance swing towards entertainment and business interests?
Well, I suppose, to take it to an extreme, if there were one, then people would be upset, and the people most upset are the people that are connected to that horse. But again, that doesn't really. There's not a formula that I guess answers your question. We're not sitting still, and for us, it's I guess it's just to constantly improve is what we strive for.
So, what's the trend then? Is the trend upwards, even, or down?
Over the past, so we measure this from. We've got a really, a robust measure for the last 7 full seasons and the season to date. So 7.5 years. Over that period, it's been sort of within that same statistical range, I suppose.
So you're not improving?
Well, it depends. No, well, we're working on it, obviously, and
but if you're in that same statistical range, if you're in that same statistical range, and you have been over the last 7 years, you're not improving.
Yeah, but I guess that the difficulty in statistics, where you've got a very small numerator over a large denominator, it's hard to sort of affect a very, But I take your point. It would be nice to see the figures coming down, but as I say, it's statistically a small number.
Now, Martin Burns says in terms of horse deaths, the industry is self-regulating and it is meeting industry best practice. There is currently no independent welfare code specifically for thoroughbred horse racing, and Mr Burns says it's not needed. In terms of harness racing, we asked them about their death rates, and they say last racing season it recorded 4 deaths of horses. It is 9 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, in some traffic news, if you are in Wellington, drivers there are being warned of significant delays heading out of the city because the northbound lane in the Terrace Tunnel is closed. Northbound lane in the Terrace Tunnel is closed. The Transport Agency says there's a gravel spill and it is telling people to avoid the area. Let us know what it's like out there if you're sitting in a queue. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz, but make sure you're in the passenger seat if you're doing that. It's not easy being green. Rotorua residents are up for thousands of dollars to install new wood burners in order to comply with the city's new air quality regulations that come into force next year. Any wood burner put in before 2005 must be replaced with either a new low emission burner or alternative heating like a heat pump. And that's got one resident hot under the collar. Andrew McRae went to meet him.
This is a Kent wood burner, very traditional. In a lot of homes around Rotorua.
Bill Brislin wants to do the right thing, but being environmentally friendly isn't cheap or easy. The 73-year-old has no issue with the need for cleaner air, but is concerned about the paperwork involved and the cost of a new burner, a new flue and the installation.
Purchasing the fire is $3,000 plus the permit is $395 and installation is about $1,000. So the average person can expect a bill of $4,500.
Bill Brislin's lucky because his original fire was legally installed. For those whose burners weren't, a resource consent's needed, and that costs $2,400. And while Mr Brislin understands why new fires are required, he says it's frustrating having to pull out what's a perfectly good fire. He describes the process around getting a building consent as a real effort, starting with filling out the paperwork.
I was given an 8-page application. I had to provide house plans, a plan of the location of the house in terms of its neighbours, details of the installation protocol for the particular fire, and altogether it takes probably about 15 pages of material. That has to be submitted in duplicate.
The Rotorua Lakes Council says the consenting process, which is required under building legislation, ensures buildings are safe by making sure the work's done properly. In a statement, its Planning and Development Manager Jason Ward says the council tries to make the process for applicants as problem-free as possible, and staff are available to help with the required forms. Bill Brislin's particularly concerned about elderly people who may find the process daunting.
I reckon it's about 12 weeks of superannuation to buy and install and get approval to use a new fire.
He says there's no immediate benefit for homeowners.
You take out a fully functioning fire and you put in a fully functioning fire, spend $4,500 and there's no immediate benefit. There is benefit to the air pollution issue, but that's down the track. It's not an immediate benefit.
Mr. Brislin thinks some people might find it too hard and just flout the law.
People are going to say, I can't afford $4,500 and go through all the process of filling out these papers and collecting information about the fire, collecting information about the house. I can see people saying, oh, if they push me, I'll go along with it, but I'm not voluntarily going along with it.
Financial help's available for people needing to replace their wood burner, but the cost is added to the homeowner's rates bill to be paid back over 10 years. There's also a low-income heating grant available. Bill Brislin's hoping his new fire will be in and ready to go for winter, so he and his dog Minnie can enjoy the warmth.
Stretch out in front of the fire, and of course you have to trip over the dog, but she loves it.
In Rotorua for Checkpoint, call Andrew McRae-Tene.
A group with ancestral links to land at Ehumatao near Auckland Airport is calling on the government to revoke consent for a housing development there. About 300 people were at Parliament today to present an 18,000 signature petition calling for a halt to the 480 home development. Mariana Johnson was there.
It was a sea of red, white and black as protesters descended upon Parliament, waving tino rangatiratanga flags and chanting, "We will fight for Ehumatao forever." The protest was led by Soul, a group of mana whenua and locals who have occupied the land in an effort to stop the housing development going ahead. There was no sign of the Prime Minister, who was called on by a trustee at the local marae, Kōwhai Olsen, to put an end to the consent.
We implore you, as the last resort, to work with ministers to disestablish the SHA 62 at Ehumatao. Respectfully signed by 3 out of 4 mandated trustees for Makaurau Marae Māori Trust.
Fletcher Residential has previously said in a statement that it has worked in partnership with local iwi to build a mixture of terraced and affordable housing on the land. The petition was handed over by a group of young tamariki from Ehumatao to the co-leader of the Green Party, Marama Davidson. She told the crowd to much applause that the development mustn't go ahead.
A letter from me as co-leader of the Green Party is on its way to the Prime Minister as we speak, asking for this government to take responsibility and prevent this development from happening.
The fight to stop the housing development is drawing support from across the country, with Karis Fizi flying from Auckland to join the hikoi and live performers on the grounds of Parliament.
Because my grandparents can't be here, and I think if they were physically able, they would be down here to support them as well. I think we're a bit sick of, seeing profit and wealth being put over the sacredness of land and our connection and spiritual affinity with the land.
Hana also travelled from Tamaki Makaurau and says it's rangatira like Fina Cooper who inspired her to come down for the hikoi.
We're fighting for the exact same issues, so we're here in 2019 still fighting the repeat of history, which is the desecration of Māori heritage sites.
Kahukutia from Tūhoi, who grew up in her tūranga waiwai in Te Urewera, knows the importance of having a connection to the whenua.
It is my whenua that I live and die by, and think that if 480 expensive houses were being put on my whenua, that I would be doing the exact same thing that Pania and her cousins are doing.
The leader of the Soul campaign, Pania Newton, told the crowd that she wasn't sure if the petition would make a difference.
Because prior to the election of this government, the Labour Party in particularly stood with Ihu Mātou. And I was disappointed to see over the last couple of years that they had turned their back on us.
But as the group left to take a bus back to Tamaki Makaurau, Ms Newton said she and her whānau won't give up on defending Ihu Mātou. The petition will now be considered by a select committee. For Checkpoint, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
After 6, we'll have more on Pike River, but it's almost time for the news. RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The High Court says Eric Watson's company Cullen Group set up an elaborate structure to avoid paying tax, and it owes the IRD $112 million. In 2002, Mr Watson moved to the UK and repackaged his business affairs into 2 Cayman Islands-based companies, which then loaned money to the New Zealand-based Cullen Group. In a judgment released today, Justice Palmer says things were set up that way so the company could pay a 2% levy on interest instead of 15% withholding tax. Tax consultant Terry Boucher says the decision is a significant one.
The interesting part behind this is to know whether this is just an isolated example or Inland Revenue has taken this as a test case and will now go back to a number of companies it's had its eye on and say, we've just won this, so pay up.
Tax consultant Terry Boucher. National's housing spokesperson Judith Collins has produced further examples of houses she claims were already under construction when they were brought into the KiwiBuild program. In Parliament this afternoon, she asked the Housing Minister Phil Twyford why he signed off on homes in Christchurch and Rangiora that were already built or were being built.
Why has he underwritten already built 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom houses in West Park, Rangiora, selling for $480,000, while neighbouring 3-bedroom houses with an extra bathroom and a larger floor plate on their own website for $20,000 less?
Judith Collins. Phil Twyford replied that the test to determine if a KiwiBuild underwrite should proceed is ultimately whether the proposal will increase the supply of affordable houses. 18,000 petitioners are calling on the Prime Minister to revoke consent for a large housing project in South Auckland. About 300 people descended on Parliament today to protest against the 480 property development planned for Ihu Mātou in Mangere, which they say is sacred Māori land. The petition was presented to the Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson, who says it must not go ahead. A trustee of the local marae, Kōwhai Olsen, says the development is opposed by 3 of the 4 trustees. The developer, Fletcher Building, has previously said it is working in partnership with local iwi. The petition will now be considered by a select committee. Cybercriminals targeting New Zealanders with extortion-type scams raked in more than $14 million in 2018. Almost half that amount was lost in the last 3 months of the year. In its latest report, the government's cybersecurity agency, CERT NZ, said that in October, November and December, a record number of 1,300 incidents were reported, up 50% on the previous quarter. The agency's director, Rob Pope, says the criminals use information harvested from data breaches.
The scammers then use a lot of that personal information, which they then use to construct significantly credible emails, which they then send to account holders, making threats to induce them to pay up.
Rob Pope says a third of all reports last quarter were related to email extortion scams. Pharmac says extra supplies of the measles vaccine will reach Canterbury about midday tomorrow. More cases of the disease have been confirmed at a primary school and a district court. Katie Todd reports.
Family doctors running low on supplies are awaiting the arrival of 18,000 MMR doses. Among those hoping to be given them are some students at Rangiora Borough School, where Principal Alan Sutton yesterday confirmed a student had contracted measles. He says at least 28 students are unimmunised, and he has suggested to their families they get the 2 recommended MMR vaccines or stay home, which about half have done. Since a Christchurch police prosecutor came down with the disease, the Law Society says notice has been provided to the Judiciary, Ministry of Justice staff, police staff and others in the legal profession. In Christchurch, ko Katie Todd, Tēnei.
An ESR team has won the 2018 Prime Minister's Science Prize worth $500,000 for developing crime-busting software used in forensics labs around the world. Team member Joanne Bright says the STR Mix software package is used by forensic investigators to interpret complex DNA profiles that might contain trace amounts of DNA from up to 5 people. The Science Teacher Prize has gone to Carol Breisman of Hampton Hills School in Tawa, and the Emerging Scientist Prize to Auckland University bioengineer Pang Du, who is developing devices to diagnose gut problems. The Science Communicator of the Year is Victoria University climatologist James Rennick, and the Future Scientist Prize has gone to young physicist Finnegan Messerly, the latest in a string of winners from Wellington's Onslow College. A tribunal has ordered the blogger Cameron Slater to pay $70,000 to an Auckland businessman for severe humiliation, loss of dignity and injury to feelings. The case arose after Slater published personal information about Matt Blomfield on his whale oil blog between May and October 2012. Anne-Marie May reports.
In a decision released today, the Human Rights Review Tribunal has found Slater held Mr Blomfield up as a figure of contempt and ridicule. He had claimed that as a journalist he was exempt from the Privacy Act, but the tribunal says it does not accept that the blog posts relating to Mr Blomfield comprised news activity as defined in the Act. It says the ones complained about were part of a calculated attack on the businessman and an extended assassination of his character. Slater, who has had health problems since suffering 2 strokes in October, declared himself bankrupt last month. This is Anne-Marie May.
Drivers heading out of Wellington are being warned of significant delays because the northbound lane of the Terrace Tunnel is closed. The Transport Agency says a gravel spill has caused the problem and people should take a different route. It's 6:30 To sport, and the New Zealand cricketers have taken an unassailable 2-0 lead in their 3-match series against Bangladesh by winning the second test in Wellington by an innings and 12 runs. It's their 5th straight series win. Bangladesh, who needed 221 runs to make New Zealand bat again, were bowled out for 209 in their second innings, with pace bowler Neil Wagner taking 5 for 45. The win locks in second spot for the Black Caps on the international test rankings at the end of the season and earns them $730,000 in prize money. The final test starts in Christchurch on Saturday, but the home side could be without skipper Kane Williamson, who suffered a torn pectoral muscle while fielding. Former All Black Dan Carter admits his illustrious rugby career is nearing an end now that his failure to pass a cheque has triggered the annulment of his contract with the French club Racing 92. The 37-year-old had signed to play the rest of the top 14 season as an injury replacement, but a bulging disc in his back has ruled him out. He says the injury, which has bothered him for several years, may need surgery. The former UFC featherweight and lightweight champion Conor McGregor has been arrested by the police in Miami Beach for allegedly stamping on a fan's phone. The police say McGregor stomped on it several times after the man tried to take a picture of him. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Kirsten Johnstone has a song crush on Beyonce's little sister. Among others, we have a window on the world of people on the move in Great Britain, whether leaving Europe whether they like it or not. Melody Thomas hits a brick wall of sorts in this week's episode of Bang, and Louis Shepard discusses the building blocks of soil, clay, silt and sand on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine weather. Waitomo, Taumaranui, Taupo, Taranaki, Whanganui and Taihape. Rain developing in Taranaki this evening with a few heavy falls and spreading elsewhere at times tomorrow. Manawatu to Wellington also Wairarapa. A few evening showers today and rain for a time tomorrow morning. For Marlborough, scattered rain today and tomorrow morning, then clearing. Nelson and Buller, periods of rain, some heavy falls and possible thunderstorms in the west. Westland and Fiordland, cloud increasing today. Rain tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, then clearing from the south later. To Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mainly fine today but isolated showers south of Timaru, some possibly heavy. Tomorrow afternoon and evening, a squally southerly change spreads north with a period of rain and possible thunderstorms in Otago. Chatham Islands, occasional rain or showers. It's 6:09 and you're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. May the 3rd is D-Day for the Pike River mine re-entry. Now this comes more than 8 years after the mine exploded, killing 29 men. But now the re-entry date has been confirmed. Some of the victims' families are wondering what might be found and also what will happen afterwards. Logan Church reports.
The Minister for Pike River Re-entry, Andrew Little, this afternoon delivered the news that many of the victims' families have spent the best part of a decade waiting for. That's the Pike River mine drift will be re-entered on the 3rd of May. After that happens, experienced miners will start making their way up the 2.3 kilometre drift.
The progress or the pace at which they make progress will depend on those early days and early weeks, I think, to see what they find and how they go. You've got to remember that drift, that tunnel, it runs uphill, so it will be a pretty arduous task. They're looking at kind of 40 metres by 40 metres at a time. They'll move at a pace that is safe and that enables them to do their job.
Mr Little announced in November last year that the re-entry would go ahead. The agency responsible for making it happen, the Pike River Recovery Agency, has remained tight-lipped on when exactly that would happen. But this announcement today has been a long time coming for those close to the disaster. Sonia Rockhouse lost her son Ben in the explosion. He was 21. In 2016, Sonia, along with other family members, stood on the road near the mine in a bid to stop Solid Energy trucks from heading up to the site to sell it for good. She had hoped a re-entry would be earlier.
Oh, of course, any date that was earlier than what they'd been predicting was always going to be good. But at the end of the day, all the ducks have got to be in a row, and so they have to make sure that everything's in place, and we want it done safely, and it's not time-driven. And we've always said that, if it has to take that little bit longer to have it done safely and done properly, then we were quite happy to wait for that.
Bernie Monk, a spokesperson for most of the Pike River families, is also welcoming today's news. And he is now turning his attention to what may lie inside the mine. He thinks it's likely bodies will be found.
I personally think we're going to find a lot more than people anticipate going down that drift. We're going to get evidence from all the electrical work in pit bottom and stone, and I personally think we will find bodies in the drift, and who knows from there.
The re-entry itself only covers the drift and not the mine workings, which is blocked off by a large rockfall. But Mr Monk says the recovery of the drift is not the end for the Pike River families.
I'm reassuring you that there are plans in place. If there is a necessity of going further, my miners have always said, that I've been speaking to, you can never tell a rockfall till you stand in front of it. Our experts overseas have put a plan in place, and and costings and stuff like that. But let's get down to the rockfall, let's gauge it from there.
Andrew Little says an event will be organised to mark the re-entry on May the 3rd, a long-awaited milestone for families who have been waiting years for this day. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Auckland Council is resisting calls to buy up flood-damaged homes in Piha, as owners say is the cheapest option to deal with the disaster that still has some residents out of their homes a year on. Councillors met today to discuss the waterlogged West Auckland homes, with Mayor Phil Goff saying he's worried about setting a precedent if the council purchased the homes. But the Deputy Mayor says the Piha flooding is itself a test case for the whole country as heavy rainfall events increase. Jordan Bond reports.
Kim Kerrigan's home on Glenesk Road in Piha was taken over by heavy flash flooding last April.
The lounge, kitchen, dining room, laundry, the bathroom, toilet, basically the whole living and functional area, the walls are cut off to about 600 mils up of the jib. The wiring all has to be checked out because the water was up over power points. So it's a fairly extensive amount of damage.
An independent report into the flooding by consultants Tonkin and Taylor warned that Glenesk Road is likely to flood every year. Auckland Council will offer 8 options to affected residents to try stop that happening, ranging from doing nothing to raising the level of the street to building a dam or a tunnel for rainwater. But the Mayor, Phil Goff, says 4 of the 8 options aren't realistic, and some of the residents want another option altogether: for the council to buy their uninhabitable and flood-prone homes so they can move on with their lives. But the Mayor's wary of what purchasing flood-hit homes would mean.
Purchasing the flood-prone properties would be a lot cheaper than the engineering options, which is undoubtedly true. But we'd have to apply the same criteria across the whole region to be fair. You can't say, we'll help people by buying their properties here, but somewhere else where people are being flooded, no, we can't do it.
The council knows that heavy rain events are likely to be more frequent as climate change rolls on. It estimates 1 in 10 Auckland homes will flood in a 1 in 100-year rainstorm. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore is wary it's a nationwide risk that could call for the same kind of response as an earthquake warrants.
Piha is just a microcosm of what's potentially coming our way, region and nationwide. So is there any work being done to get a thorough understanding for the New Zealand Inc. situation about what we're going to do here, whether we go for some form of earthquake war damages type of nationwide insurance policy, or has that just been left purely to the Crown, or should we be leading this charge?
Kim Kerrigan says no other option fits the bill, and buying the homes to get them out of their limbo is the best and cheapest.
At least make the offer to those people that want that. I'm not saying everybody in the street has to go down that road, and a lot of them won't want to, but to make the offer to those of us that would be amenable to that, it seems the most sensible option to take.
She says Piha's situation is unique, with a steep rainwater catchment of over 1,100 hectares and a waterfall at the end of the road, which is not the case for other areas of Auckland.
So I think the unique situation out there doesn't necessarily set a precedent for the rest of Auckland. I think that is what they are afraid of, and I understand that, but I really don't think that it would.
The council will take the 8 options to residents, businesses and iwi in Piha and come back with a summary in June before a decision's made on the next step. In the meantime, residents like Kim Kerrigan say they don't think they're any closer to an acceptable solution. For Checkpoint, Jordan Bond.
National Party MP Judith Collins has produced more examples of homes she claims were already under construction when they were brought into the KiwiBuild program. Ms Collins took aim at the Housing Minister Phil Twyford in Parliament over the government's underwrite guarantee of KiwiBuild houses, which she says in some cases were already built and clad when they were signed off. Matthew Tunison reports.
Last week, Ms Collins hit out at the Housing Minister for including houses in the Huapai development in northwest Auckland in his KiwiBuild figures, even though they were all but built already. And she put forward further examples in the House today.
Why did he approve a Crown underwrite to build houses in Marshlands, Christchurch, in November 2018, when council records show these houses were already under construction in April 2018, 7 months before he signed the Crown underwrite?
Mr Twyford wasn't able to immediately produce details, after which Ms Collins brought up further cases.
Why did he approve a Crown underwrite last November to build houses in Summerfield, Christchurch, when council records show the houses were built and clad last September?
The Crown underwrite, signed off by Cabinet in August last year, means taxpayers would have to foot the bill for any losses incurred by private developers over unsold KiwiBuild houses. Mr Twyford said the test to determine if a KiwiBuild underwrite should proceed is ultimately whether the proposal will increase the supply of affordable houses.
I'm advised that the threshold can be met in 4 key ways: by getting a development underway, by bringing forward a development or stage of a development that is scheduled for a later time period, or by redesigning part of a development to provide for additional affordable homes rather than a smaller number of more expensive homes.
Mr Twyford said he was aware of just 4 underwrites approved while construction was underway.
The expected net cost to the Crown of these underwrites is 0. The homes are valued at $26 million, or 4% of the total number of underwrites, and almost 0.5% of total KiwiBuild homes.
But Ms Collins took another swing.
Why has he underwritten already built 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom houses in West Park, Rangiora, selling for $480,000, while Mike Greer Homes are advertising neighbouring 3-bedroom houses with an extra bathroom and a larger floor plate on their own website for $20,000 less?
Meanwhile, Mr Twyford has announced the government will not be creating any more special housing areas after the legislation expires in September. It was established by the previous government to help fast-track consenting, but the minister says the policy has failed to make housing more affordable. From Parliament, Matthew Tunison.
Auckland District Health Board says it's had to make changes to stop patients lining up for hours outside its South Auckland Emergency Dental Clinic as demand for public dental care increases. The DHB has traditionally run a drop-in clinic at Middlemore Hospital, but has recently introduced a phone booking system due to increasing demand. But an Auckland Welfare Trust says while the emergency clinics exist, primary dental care remains too expensive and many people are pulling their own teeth out to stop the pain. Brooke Jenner reports.
Uliti Lolohea had a toothache for more than a year and couldn't stand it any longer. But the Auckland man says he couldn't afford to pay for dental work, so he went to Middlemore Hospital's emergency clinic to get the tooth pulled for $40.
I don't want to pull my tooth out, but I had no choice. So that's why I come here.
He says for people like him struggling to make ends meet, there is no other option.
I got 4 kids to look after, my wife. I'm the only one working. I can't fork out $800 just for one tooth. And how are we going to survive?
The Tumuaki, or head of the Huakina Development Trust in South Auckland, Maria Clark, says she sees cases like Mr Lolohea's on a daily basis. She says some people are in so much pain they try to pull their own teeth out at home.
People are pulling their own teeth out, and then we've had a few problems where people have had to come in and see the doctors to get them stitched because they've just ripped the teeth out more or less. Because it's got so loose or it's so rotten that it's best, that's the only way they can do it.
The Trust provides support in health and well-being, environment and education issues, but Ms Clark says dental care is the biggest issue it faces. In a statement, the Auckland District Health Board says it is struggling to meet increasing demand for its emergency dental services, and some patients are not being seen as quickly as they or the DHB would like. It introduced the phone booking system because people had been waiting for long periods outside the clinic. Now they can turn up for a scheduled appointment instead. But Mr Lolohea says the new system only made it harder to get an appointment. After a week of trying to book via the phone system, he finally landed a spot. But he had to go to the hospital clinic at 5 o'clock in the morning to ensure he would be seen early. The president of the Dental Association, Dr Bill O'Connor, says problems around the price and accessibility of dental care have long existed. He says delaying treatments only leads to more issues in the long term.
It's pretty traumatic and it's really stressful, and it just makes your problem worse. These problems don't get better on their own. They need treatment as soon as they can get it. So, long wait times are really unacceptable.
Dr O'Connor says the demand for emergency clinics, which he calls enormous, is growing every year. But he says DHBs will only be able to improve their systems if the government provides funding. In a statement, Health Minister David Clark acknowledges people are dealing with what he says are third world health conditions as a result of bad oral health and an inability to access treatment. He says his long-term goal is to make dental care more accessible and affordable for New Zealanders, but change is unlikely before the 2020 election. Dr O'Connor says a publicly funded comprehensive dental service is needed, but the government needs to act fast to help those in dire need.
The barrier at the moment is there's not the funding available to provide the basic care that these people are needing. If you extend it to a fairly comprehensive type scheme, it is going to be really, really costly.
Dr O'Connor says a government-funded comprehensive oral health scheme would be to everyone's benefit. For Checkpoint Corbrook, Jenna Aho.
A team of crime-busting software developers have taken out New Zealand's top science prize this year. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern handed out $1 million in prize money to scientists, ranging from a bioengineer developing innovative devices to diagnose gut problems, to a young physicist who is the third student from his school to win one of the prestigious awards. Our Changing World producer Alison Balance reports.
Crime-stopping software proved to be the overall winner of this year's Prime Minister's Science Prize, the most valuable award for New Zealand scientists. The Kiwi DNA profiler, called StarMix, is now used in forensics labs around the world.
The software is used to interpret forensic DNA profiles. It's used to solve crime, basically.
Dr Joanne Bright from ESR, the Institute of Environmental Science and Research, says the StarMix team spent 2 years developing the innovative software package before it began to be used in frontline crime fighting in 2012. StarMix allows forensic investigators to quickly determine the unique genetic profiles of up to 5 individuals from a sample collected at a crime scene. These difficult mixed samples typically contain trace amounts of DNA from an unknown number of people.
So back in the old days, when we used to get DNA profiles from large samples, so traditionally blood and semen, they would be very easy profiles to interpret. Typically they would be only from 1 or 2 individuals, but moving towards these trace amounts of DNA, you can see profiles that have contributors from anything from 1 to 4 or 5 people. So these mixed DNA profiles are more and more complex. And that's what StarMix has been designed for, to help us interpret those more complex DNA profiles.
The StarMix team is a group of 16 software developers, many of whom also have a background in forensic science.
This is my team, and yes, we sit at computers all day. Hi, everybody. Hi. There's a variety of roles, so we obviously develop the software, but we also support the use of the software, and we train users to be able to use the software.
The StarMix software package has been sold around the world and used in more than 100,000 forensic cases.
More than 40 laboratories in the US are using StarMix, a number in Canada, in the UK and Europe, more recently in Hong Kong, and a few laboratories in China have purchased the software.
Joanne Bright says the StarMix team intends to spend the $500,000 in prize money on further developing the software to include new applications. The Prime Minister's Future Scientist Prize, worth $50,000, was awarded to young physicist Finnegan Messerly. He's the latest in a string of winners from Wellington's Onslow College.
So my project was measuring the material properties of granular materials, that's sort of like corn or sand, that sort of thing. And it's a lot harder than you might think, so I spent quite a while figuring out ways to do that.
Finnegan, who's now studying physics and maths at Victoria University of Wellington, says that the science department at his high school was key to his success.
Studying physics at Onslow is really, really good, particularly if you get involved with the stuff that Kent Hogan does. So he runs essentially science tournaments, physics tournaments. And if you get involved with those really early, you learn basically all the skills you need for science.
The Prime Minister's Science Teacher Prize went to another inspiring teacher, Carol Briesman from Hampton Hill Primary School in Wellington. The McDiarmid Emerging Scientist Prize went to bioengineer Peng Du at the University of Auckland, who's developing innovative devices to detect and diagnose gut problems. And the Science Communication Prize was awarded to Victoria University of Wellington climatologist James Renwick for outstanding communication about the science behind our changing climate and how it will affect us in the future. For Checkpoint, I'm Alison Ballance.
And you can find out more about the winners by going to the webpage for Our Changing World at rnz.co.nz. Time for some of your feedback now on our earlier story about the number of thoroughbred racehorses that have died in the racing season. Last year's racing season, 25 horses died. So far, we're 7 months into this year's racing season and 8 horses have been killed on the track or had to have been euthanised. A lot of feedback on this. This person, Michael, says, how many Kaimanawa horses are about to be euthanised soon? Lisa, you need to get down from your high horse. Thanks for your feedback, Michael. And Max from Dunedin says, surely the fundamental difference between injuries sustained in sports, such as rugby, boxing or even motor racing, in those so-called blood sports like horse racing and rodeo, Max says, the likes of rugby players get to make informed choice about whether to participate or not. In the case of horse racing and the rodeo, the animals have no choice regarding their participation and the injuries or death they may subsequently sustain. On that subject, Greg says, you missed the main story, he says. Apparently this guy is able to talk to horses to find out how they feel about being flogged around the track. Amazing, says Greg. And this one from Simon in Wellington. Simon says, good grief, the man from the horse racing industry sounded exactly like British World War I generals rationalising troop casualties in the Somme front in the summer of 1916. Appreciate all your feedback. Don't forget that you can go online and check out some of our visual stories from tonight. If you've just been listening on the radio in your car, in particular, Andrew McRae's story on replacing old wood burners in Rotorua, you will get to see the faithful fireside dog, Minnie, who is the silent star of that story. All our other stories are online too. You can catch up on those, rnz.co.nz/checkpoint or on our Facebook page for all the latest news. That is us for this evening, though. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back tomorrow, same place, same time.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A government bill seeking to reclassify synthetic cannabinoids as Class A drugs has just passed its first reading in Parliament. An Eric Watson-owned company has been confirmed as owing $112 million to the IRD, including $51 million in unpaid tax plus interest. Cyber criminals extorted more than $14 million from New Zealanders last year, and blogger Cameron Slater has been ordered to pay an Auckland businessman $70,000 by the Human Rights Review Tribunal. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Hi, I'm Jeff Houtman, and way back in 1993 I was part of a super team charged with creating a brilliant new sitcom for New Zealand television. But despite our lofty hopes and ambitions and a truckload of money, it turned out to be, well, crap. So I've decided to try to find out what went wrong and how we ended up making the worst sitcom